The truth is, I suspect Eric Dirksen is not wearing any pants.
I've already started recording, so there you go. I did see an article that a lot of the stores are selling a lot more tops than pants or skirts. So
wow.
Yeah, that much stuff going on Zoom. Well, with that beautiful introduction, I'll just for the sake of the recording, I decided to gather some of my friends and colleagues together to do a video on pastoring, pandemic pastoring, and let me arrange my screen a little bit here, just to talk about, well, what things are like right now for pastors in at least the Sacramento area. So with me today are Eric Dirksen. He and I have done a video before, and Mark Holland and Noel DeLuna. And I think maybe what we'll do first is sort of go around the circle. Y'all can give brief introductions, say a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your church, and then we'll take it from there. So I'll just go in the direction I have you. Go ahead, Eric. A little bit about yourself.
My name is Eric Dirksen. I'm the pastor of Christ Church in Davis. It's a Christian Reformed church of nearly 10 years. We'll have our 10th anniversary this fall. My family and I have been in Davis for 12. What else do you want to know, Paul? Husband, 3 kids.
That's good. That's good. Grew up in Iowa.
Yeah, Midwestern transplant.
That's fun. Lots more information about Eric on my first conversation with him.
You're always looking to mine that Midwestern aspect of my history, right, aren't you?
And he's very active on Twitter, and you can always tell when he's preparing his sermons, because there's all these Augustine and Chrysostom quotes or John Calvin quotes he's putting on Twitter there. So I always really like that.
Yes.
It's quarantine time. These aren't sermons. These are meditations.
Oh, well, we will get into that. All right. And next is Mark Holland. Mark, why don't you introduce yourself? Never been on my channel before.
Hey there. No, haven't been on. I don't know how to get on. You won't invite me on. Just kidding. Yeah. Mark Holland, City Life Church in downtown Sacramento.
And you grew up in the thriving metropolis of?
Well, I was baptized exactly 80 feet behind you in that building in 1977, and then I grew up in Ripon. That's the metropolis you were probably talking about.
That's right. The thriving metropolis of Ripon, California, the beating heart of Christian reformdom in Northern California.
And almond production. And the beating heart of almond production.
Heart of almond production. And Mark was he was an intern and resident at Livingstone's back in the day, and has a church in area of Sacramento known as Midtown. So that's what. And how long have you been? When did you guys have your first service, Mark?
2007.
2007. Okay. So
yeah.
13 years y'all been doing this. All right. And Noel, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hello. Noel DeLuna. I'm the pastor at River Rock Church. It's over in Folsom, California. River Rock's been meeting since, I don't really remember.
1999.
1999. That's right. That's right. So I came on board there as a commissioned pastor in 2016 officially. So
okay,
if you're on the job.
And you have the distinction among us as being bivocational.
Yes, that's right. I am a bivocational pastor.
So what's your other job?
I am a reliability engineer for a semiconductor company here in Folsom.
Okay. Well, thank you, Noel. And well, let's start with when did you first begin to imagine that this strange thing happening in China might change the reliable and predictable patterns of your life? Any of you?
I'll be honest, and this is not meant to make me look good. the first time I raised my eyebrow at this, I was having a parent Little League meeting in mid to late February. And, I heard it on the news or anything, but recognizing that it was coming to California sort of faster than anywhere else is because I had a parent in my Little League team meeting. So the season hasn't started yet, right? It's just get to know, your new coach and yada, yada, yada. Kids aren't involved. It's just the parents. And there's a woman there who is, I think, a lawyer for the Air Force, but she's at one of the local Air Force bases where some of these initial COVID-19 patients were, getting off of a cruise ship in the Bay Area, and then they were being held by the U.S. military. Well, anybody around here knew where that was. And this woman in my group she was wearing fatigues, and she was like, yeah, I'm there making sure people aren't leaving and yada, yada, yada. And of course we started peppering her with questions, but that was my first inkling that, is in my living room, somebody very intimately connected very early. But my thoughts didn't immediately go to what's this going to do to church, to be honest. It just went to what's next in the state.
Any of the rest of you?
I would say that I really lacked any vision for like what we ended up having happen. I remember traveling, I think January 20, I was traveling to Florida, and the news was about, talking about this happening in China. And I thought, this is probably the last time I'm comfortable doing, being in airports like this. Then I still ended up having like a March 2 trip to Michigan. And that was right when it was probably out there spreading in all kinds of ways. But there was still kind of this public cloak of, oh, well, if you just, wash your hands and all this kind of stuff, you'll be fine. And then, yeah, right after that trip, it was like, but I would just say that I didn't really have any vision until some stuff really started coming out within a couple weeks of stay at home, sheltering in place orders. Some stuff started to come out, or that I was at least paying attention to. And it was started to be like, oh, this is going to be, some changing some things. And yeah, so. But I guess that was pretty late. That was, we stopped doing our Sunday service. And it almost felt like we should have stopped 1 week earlier, but a lot of churches still went like another week after we went. But yeah, so.
How about you, Noel?
Yeah, my first inkling that it was going to affect us was sometime around last week of February when the company that I work for made it optional for some people to stay at work, especially to those that are what do you call this?
Immune deficient.
Yeah, immunodeficient. Yes, that's right. And so I do have a few colleagues decided to stay at home and started wondering, gee, okay, how will this get worse? And all of a sudden, gradually you could see more and more measures being taken, social distancing and whatnot. And March 8th, I think, we were a little bit later in responding. We stopped meeting March 8th, I believe, as a church. We said we will honor the Sacramento public.
That would have been the 15th.
Yeah,
because actually the 22nd was when it actually came down. So Eric, you were the first one in terms of our cluster. That the week before on March 1, I flew to, or March 2, I flew to Tucson, and we had some meetups and some stuff going on down there. And as I was in Southern California, began to watch state of emergencies happen and some of these things, and still didn't quite know what to do. And then flew back that Friday, the 6th. And I remember flying back from Chino, California, and walked down the plane, and the plane just smelled like, someone had just recently wiped the whole thing down, and there were fewer people on the flight, and some people were already making comments about it. But then we had service the 8th. But then that week, Eric, you sent out an email message basically to the cluster, which is our group of pastors locally, and said, you guys having service? That would be the 15th. You guys having service? And what provoked that, Eric?
Two things almost simultaneously. One was a larger church in Davis. I had heard sort of through the grapevine that they made a decision on Tuesday of that week. So I think that'd be the
10th.
The 10th. And I think I sent out my email to all of you shortly after I heard that Wednesday morning. About 60 minutes after I sent out that email, like, hey, what are you all doing? I got a phone call from one of my deacons who's in public health. She works in the private sector, but for a very large company. And she's got a master's in public health, and this is her job. And she was reaching out to sort of, so what I did was actually I sent an email to colleagues, and then I sent an email to my council, which is elders and deacons in the Christian Reformed Church, our leadership team. And I said, hey, somebody, like, what's the deal? How should we be thinking about this? I feel pretty strongly that, I'm clergy. I'm going to stay in my lane here and sort of rely on other people in this realm. And we just happen to have a deacon who is on the front lines of, news, who had contacts in the CDC and the State Department and things like that. And she took it very seriously, very early, and encouraged all of us to do the same. So we followed her lead, and we had made a decision by Wednesday the 10th, or Wednesday the 11th, I think, and then sent it out to the congregation that Thursday.
And your initial decision was to suspend services for 3 weeks.
Yeah, she was pretty candid with us and said, let's go ahead and say 3 weeks, but listen, it's going to be longer. And I think I made some offhanded remark like, well, okay, then I'm going to pray for Easter. And she said something like, we can pray for that. But that was her tone. So I did spend 3 weeks praying that we could get back, for services for Easter, but we all recognized, I think, within a week or two that wasn't going to happen. But that's, I was just following the lead of people, that do this for a living.
Well, during that week, I was still sort of contemplating, because there was another leg of the trip that would be kicked off the Sunday, the 15th, where Job and John Van Donk would come up from Southern California and participate in the service here. We were going to do a meetup on Saturday in Fresno, and then Sunday, Sacramento. Then we're going to drive all the way up to Seattle. Of course, we're watching everything going on in Seattle, which was earlier. So then by that Thursday night, the 12th, we had a council meeting. And part of the question I had for the council meeting is, do we have worship service or not? And at the council meeting, at first, the idea that we would not worship on the 15th just seemed sort of crazy. But given the fact that we have so many senior citizens in our church and so many people with diabetes and other underlying health concerns, we knew that if we just admonished some of our older members to stay home, they wouldn't. So we decided, well, we'll cancel church for this Sunday. And then it became very clear pretty quickly that things were changing very quickly. So I said, let's not make any big plans. Let's just decide for this week. And so since then, we've been doing weekly Zoom meetings as a council, but that's sort of how we got rolling. How about you, Mark? How did that week look for you?
Yeah, I mean, that was the week. I remember that really clearly because we were all trying to figure out what to do, I think. And so I just remember remember a few things. I remember within each 24-hour period, just things shifting, substantially, like the heaviness kind of dropping a level each 24 hours. Almost like you just were watching the news every 5 minutes to see, I'd get a notification through either like the one of my sports apps that would tell me that the NBA canceled the season. And, when stuff like that was just coming in, it was like, wait a minute. So something right in there, like I dug in one day and just I dug in and tried to read some things to really get a little more educated and watch a couple videos. So I think you had pointed me, Paul, to this Dr. Campbell. And I've been watching him ever since that week. But I dug in, and it took me a couple hours of just digging in and really looking at things. And I think Italy was just this test case for what this is like. And by the end of that, couple of hours of digging into that stuff, I was just completely changed. I think it was maybe the Tuesday or Wednesday, but I begin with everybody just that I was talking to, just like, this is going to be huge. I think we're going to see the writing on the wall increasing with each day, that this is, we're not meeting, and it's going to be a long time. And, but there was, that week felt really kind of intense that way. And I remember us having like a staff meeting in person, reviewing kind of how Sunday went. And we just spent the whole meeting. It was like that same day that these things were coming out about the NBA canceling and other things. And I remember we're sitting there and I said, the NBA just canceled their season, and we're at the staff meeting. But this meeting, we talked, that's all we talked about. And in fact, one of our staff members wasn't there because she had what seems to have been, she never was able to get tested. Seems like she had COVID-19. And it took her like until about 4 or 5 days ago. Now it took her about over 3 weeks to recover. She just kept battling this thing, and she was young. So, but anyway, yeah, that was I remember that distinctly. And we didn't have anybody on our leadership team who was this, health background or strong voice. So I felt like I was trying to get it, solidified that we're not meeting, because I just felt like the writing was on the wall.
Now, Noel, your situation's a little different in that both Eric and Mark planted the churches that they serve in. You were a lay person, and then you were on staff part-time, and then Chuck, the senior pastor, took a call to another church. So your leadership structure in your church has been in transition. What was that like in terms of your leadership that week for you?
That was interesting. So we took the cue from Eric. We looked at Sacramento County's guidance, and so we didn't have a medical professional on our leadership team as well. So we took advantage of Sacramento Public Health, and they, interestingly enough, they did say, okay, at that time, prohibit anything above 50, and our church attendance is less than that, and so I think that was kind of like the basis for it. There was the strongest voices said, let's continue. So we did decide to meet that week with guidance on, we prepared the church, cleaned it up, social distancing, communion, change the way you can do communion so that we minimize having to touch things and so on and so forth. So that was that week, knowing that next week could be different. So we took it week by week, and the call that week was, let's go meet. But when the guidance changed the next week, it was very clear that so no debate there at all. Once it says we got to prohibit everything.
So when your church decided, okay, at whatever point to say, okay, we're not going to meet this week, how did you get the message out to your people, and what kinds of feedback did you get?
In our case, it was everybody agreed, and by that time there was no debate. We had to. The situation was getting worse, and news from Italy and the NBA season being canceled and all of that. Right, other organizations. My company decided that we all work from home and so on, and it just became clear that we had to go. That was the week where nobody could.
The city, I think you're right, Noel, by the 15th, Sacramento County was saying no groups larger than 50. And of course, then by the 22nd, it was, you're closed.
Yep.
Anyone else? Feedback from the people of your church?
We were pretty early, and you asked how we communicated it. We sent out a church-wide email. We posted it on our various, social media networks. And then as a leadership team, as a council, we immediately, part of our decision-making process was, well, how are we going to, go forward, at least for the first week? And one of the things that we decided to do was, we're not a huge congregation either. Was we had just made this directory, actually, which felt like this old church thing to do, but people wanted each other's addresses, and so not everybody that considers Christ Church their church do we have all their information. So we had to rely on email, but then we also, if we had phone numbers and stuff, we had each council member take about 6 to 8 people and call them directly and let them know that this is, the plan, and here's our rationale, and do you have any questions? And at least for me personally, and hearing from my council, there was zero pushback at all. In fact, I only got positive things, being even, maybe a week earlier than some of you all. I got like a few text messages and phone calls and emails saying thank you and that. So other people were apparently more, forward than I was, because I was like, well, I'm just following, the pros. But it was overwhelmingly positive.
What now I think, and part of the reason I want to walk through this is one of the things that becomes apparent is that within a month of a lot of these events, we very quickly forget exactly what happened. I mean, our memories are quite unreliable, and so part of what I wanted to do this video for is just to kind of leave a record for what it was like in the middle of March, in that second week and the third week, because as Mark said, things happened so quickly that in a little period of days, it seemed like we were living a lot of life, and there was a lot of attention and all of that going on. There was in those earlier weeks, there was sort of a meme that was getting going among pastors, sort of riffing on the idea that during the plagues, churches didn't flee, churches stayed put, and that sort of got translated. And First Things, Reno and First Things had written a rather prominent piece that sort of got translated as any churches that close are basically are not trusting in God, or not are basically doing something wrong. And so that aspect has been interesting to watch, that conversation. Have any of you seen that, heard that, have any reflections on that?
One other riff on it was that, are we giving in to fear rather than faith? That got up during that week. That was one of the conversations. I tried to look for in the past for guidance. Right? There's never anything that happened like this before, right? And so where's precedents and so on? And I couldn't find any. And I did find that article too about what the churches did during the plague. And there was even this story about John Calvin, being, sticking with the people with the plague and praying for them, and he being so brave and whatnot, and so
and
on.
His health was always crappy if you read him.
Yeah. But to me, Paul, it was really more of that was probably the theological discussion I had. Are we giving into fear versus faith? Not so much on are we doing the right thing or not. It was more of that way, and we wanted to comply with the government order as much as possible, right? And we never thought that this would be the state imposing something on us, right? That infringes our freedom of religion or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like that's really insightful, Noel, and I don't know. It just seems like it's a crisis that it brings out some of the crazies in the bigger Christian world. People choose their hill to stand on, or to die on, or whatever, or to go to jail on. If you're the pastor in Florida who had his church meet after the order for their state was not to meet, and it just it's just interesting. It's like it's an interesting. Okay, here's a leadership movement, or moment, and the people are anxious and they're panicking and they're looking for leadership. Okay, here, what do you do as a pastor, or as a leadership team, or as a council or board? So it is kind of interesting to just watch how different people react to that, and because I think that not only are the people who, there's examples out there that people took that route of this is the faith route, we're not going to be told what to do by the government or something like that. There's also the people who kind of just only reacted to what was they were being forced to do. And then there were others who maybe proactively said, this is where we're going to, out of compassion, for people in our society, we're going to, and in fact, we're going to try to tell our neighbors and friends and other people, that they should be social distancing, and that's a work of Christ's church, of compassion for those who are vulnerable, So I felt like there's a lot of places you could go with that leadership moment. So it was kind of interesting to see where people went.
I kind of like to, I think Paul and Eric, I read the emails and the communications you guys sent out. And I remember distinctly the love for neighbor angle of this, I think and that idea started to come out. And that kind of changed my way of thinking, the way of seeing this too, of us staying apart temporarily as a way to love our neighbor, right? Protect and limit the spread of COVID virus is a loving act to do. So that framing helps us to also, at least for my church, communicated the same thing to them when we were decided to shut down, and met that. So that one was helpful, really, in how you guys framed this.
Now, Eric, I hadn't heard Reno on First Things. I hadn't seen that article until you tweeted it out, and you had some strong words on Twitter. Maybe he's gonna block me from following him now on Twitter, because I follow Eric closely because I respect him and he finds interesting things. And so Dirksen, you responded to Reno on First Things. What were some of your thoughts, and then where are you at now?
Strangely, Twitter's my safe space, Paul, and you're ruining it for me.
Twitter is a very poor choice for a safe space.
My reaction to Reno. So Reno's piece, if you didn't read it, which he then followed up even more bizarrely to my mind with like 2 or 3 more sort of doubling down. I thought Reno's piece actually had some interesting points to make, which perhaps could have been made thoughtfully, but couched in the language and tone that he did just felt like sort of the knee-jerk. The feel of it to me was like, okay, well, this is knee-jerk political, anti-Trump kind of thing. Not that I immediately want to go there, but that's how it felt when I read it.
First one to name Donald Trump in a video. There you go.
You're welcome. I think that the tweet that you're referencing, I think I said something like this reeks of dualism. And I was a little bit surprised as a segue, both the Reno piece and then even some of the things that responded to it, and even some of the sort of internal dialogue in a denomination that is Reformed. I was surprised at how little Reformed reflection we seem to be having along the lines of, sort of a, forgive me for this too, but a Doyeweirdian sphere sovereignty kind of angle to, well, who should we be listening to? And while, yes, it is very much my job, my role to shepherd the spirituality of the people under my care, to teach them to pray, to love them well, and so forth and so on. I also felt like this was an opportunity to be Reformed and to say like, hey, there are health experts, and dear clergy, let's stay in our lane a little bit here. We're being told this, and you can respond to it as the government's telling me something, but I didn't feel that way. We weren't responding to the government. We were responding to our own leadership and others that, you just had to be online and read some of these things. And so, I thought the Reno piece and some of the responses reeked of sort of a dualism between that kind of thing that Noel mentioned. Either you're loving your neighbor or, you only care about materialism or something. I mean, it was sort of I thought it was grotesque and clickbaity, but
got me to click.
Yeah, I read all 3 pieces and then got angry and stopped tweeting about them.
So I really like, part of what I think this moment affords us is a time to see ourselves in what for many of us is a rather unique situation where there are a lot of things coming at us quickly. Playing armchair quarterbacks, observing people in past centuries or other countries, judging them for the decisions that they make. Now, suddenly, when things come quickly at us, we have leadership moments. We have to make calls. You know, what goes into these decisions? What responses do we make? I think all of this is interesting for us. Now, another comment very quickly on the heels of this was, and just like that, we're all televangelists. And that one, I don't know if you tweeted that, Eric. So suddenly,
God forbid.
So suddenly we're in a situation which is now a little bit of digging in history. You realize that the pandemic in 1918, 1919, 1920, you know, churches closed for that. Suddenly we don't have a response to this for many of us in our seculum, in our space that we have institutional memory for. So now we have to go digging in files and Googling and all of this to begin to read how past leaders paid attention to it. But it's also unique in that whereas, let's say in 1918, churches might suspend services, well, what then? What does the pastor do? Does the pastor do home visits? Does exactly how to respond? And one of the things that I think a few years from now, which however that looks, we will begin to pay attention to is how in this moment we had all of these social media tools and the internet through which to try to do something. Okay, and I think my church is a little different in that it became apparent very quickly that a few of my members don't have broadband at all. The one technology that was ubiquitous within the church was the telephone and the mailbox, but in terms of Zoom or something like that. So let's now kind of go to the moment when you realized, folks aren't going to be coming into this room now for at least a few weeks. And now the further we get down this, we're beginning to realize maybe a good bit longer, but we don't know. How do we care for the flock? And then we're going to have to think about, all three of your churches, to my knowledge, do weekly communion.
Yes.
And so walk through some of that for me.
Well, we decided to, we're a fairly young congregation with a few older folks, but they seem for the most part to be pretty technologically savvy. So we decided we wanted to try to have various touch points as far as like direct care early on. So we were going to try to care for our people. And that's kind of the language that we were using right away. Like it wasn't how do we get more clicks in the time of COVID? It was, we have people that we care about and that consider this their congregation, and it's our job, it's our role to care for them well. So how do we do that? Well, we talked about print. So like as soon as we made the decision, we made a couple of decisions simultaneously. One was, I'll write a daily reflection and send it out via email. One was, let's do some evening prayer for people via Zoom, just to give them that kind of a touch point during the week. And then the third was, I was sending liturgy. I was creating an at-home liturgy for people to use. And the first few weeks, we didn't do anything online in terms of like Sunday. We can talk about how that developed a little bit. But the first few weeks, I wrote a liturgy and then sent it to people for them to use at home. So our goal was print or email, a couple of things per week of the opportunity to gather via Zoom, and then Sunday at home liturgies. And I just encourage people those first few weeks, let's do them together at 10. I kept saying we'll be together in practice, if not in person. And so we'll be doing the same practices. Here's the liturgy that we're working through. Here's the prayers that we're working through. I think I even made some kind of cheesy reference to those early videos from like Spain or Italy of people singing out their balconies and, you know, go ahead and throw open your windows and sing the doxology at 10:10, and maybe you'll hear a neighbor doing it. I doubt it, but you know, hey, why not?
Davis.
But that was our initial response.
Okay.
And that came out of, and you know, we can loop back to this once we hear from Mark and Noel, but I think that came out of our philosophy of ministry and how we do things. And I'll leave it there for now and talk about what everybody else did.
Are you still writing daily reflections?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They go out to our email list. They're on our Facebook page, and they get put out on Twitter by our church Twitter account. I do not retweet those.
How about you, Mark? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, we decided to give it a go with Zoom. We have a pretty young congregation, so and it's been working out pretty good. Little learning curve each week.
What do you do via Zoom?
Yeah, so we actually just took our liturgy that we already were using, and it is more, you know, liturgical compared to a lot of American church worship services. So it starts with a you know, like it has these main parts of like this gathering part where it's like a call to worship, and then confession of sin time where there's a prayer we all kind of say in unison, and then some silence, and then there's, you know, preaching, and then there's passing of the peace, there's preaching, there's communion, and then kind of like the benediction. So all these pieces are there, and we just did all the same things, and we were surprised to find how with some tweaks each week that we could have I mean, the distance is still there, the distance and the awkwardness of just, and a little bit of that hollowness of we're just not with each other in the same way is still there, and it's a sad, hard part of it. But with that there, they've worked out really well, you know, as far as they can to make it a kind of an engagement together, and they've allowed the format has allowed for like a participatory feel, so that, and there's some technological things along the way that have helped that to figure out how to do that. But yeah, I was kind of surprised. And then we have a few people who are maybe above 50 years old in our congregation, but not very many. So, and those folks loved it, and they figured it out, and yeah, so that's what we did.
Do you do music over Zoom?
We actually do. Yeah.
So what does that look like? I mean, are you at home doing this? Because Mark's got some musical skills, and so are you just doing it all? Is this the Mark show over Zoom on Sunday morning, and you do the music and you preach? And
yeah, right. No, it's actually a very much a group effort. So that I don't want to get too in the weeds on it, but I'm doing a small part in the same way that we had been before. So I'm sort of like this pastoral presence stabilizing factor, and I'm also I'm a little bit techie enough that I'm like the host of the call the way you are, Paul. So you're dealing with people needing to come in the call and stuff like that, and so I found I'm able to do that, and yet so we have like a liturgist, and so that person would do most of the service, you know, up to the sermon part, and then there's a feature for breakout rooms. So I'm the host. I can click on that and shoot everybody to these smaller groups for passing of the peace, to just have 5 minutes to chat with some other random people who are on the call and say hi and catch up. So you know, and then we balanced it. I think one of the things right away that I sensed was we needed to have some, because everybody's muted throughout this thing, except for the few people participating. And so the first Sunday, it seemed clear to me we had to have like hey, stick around if you have prayer concerns, and we'll have a prayer time over the call for anybody who wants to stay on. And so it's worked out great. So we've done that every time. And that's where, okay, everybody's unmuted who's on, and it's usually like, you know, 8 to 15 people, and it's just worked out nicely. And then we discovered the breakout room thing to allow for a passing of the peace moment towards the beginning too. That loosened things up and warmed things up a little bit too. Okay. So yeah.
Do you, how many people do you get on your Zoom call then, just I mean, is it 15, 30? I mean, I
Well,
presume it could go to 100.
yeah, we've actually Stephanie is the administrative assistant, and she right after the first week she started this like spreadsheet keeping track, and it was interesting because you might see so many boxes, but she kept the totals of, well, how many people are in all those boxes? Maybe there's like a couple kids running back and forth in the background, and people coming and going. But yeah, so we've been getting way better turnout at this way than we were getting live. So I don't know what to do with that. Maybe we'll just keep doing this. But
yeah, we no longer have to pay rent. We're a strictly
right.
Zoom church.
Yeah.
There's going to be weird things that come out of this. There might be some strictly Zoom churches and we'll talk about that, Eric. Don't worry, we'll talk about that.
Strictly Zoom. Well, Paul, it's a good question. So, like, we happened to find a musical person that was able to deal with this technology, and we connected with him. And he had only played at our church one Sunday before this, and it was a brand new, like, here's this guy, we're trying him out. And then the next week, and he's got these gifts to be able to do this, on a call. And so it's kind of like, it's like, hey, there's a song playing and it's really good and it's drawing you in, and some people are singing along. You can see the words are on the screen because we integrate like a Google Slides thing. And then there's a couple of musicians who are volunteer musicians who are just playing along. They're muted on the screen, but they're playing along to the song because they just love music. And so and then we do communion, but we're just like, hey, you're going to have to gather your own elements. And so those things have just been interesting. How to do music, how to make it a little bit warm, how to do communion. Because one of the first things I emailed our group, or a couple people in our group, and I said, hey, what are you guys thinking about? What is the church if we're all stopping meeting? We've had this safety net of like, the preaching of the word and the celebration of the sacraments, and as these two of the three marks of the church. So, okay, it honestly took my foundation out a little bit. Like I had to have some dialogue and figure that out. What are we right now? So
all that's left is church discipline.
You better show up. There better be a box.
If you're not on the Zoom call, we're coming for you.
I'm sorry, Pastor, my webcam doesn't work, I swear.
The third mark of the church.
Well, we'll come back to some of the theological reflection. Noel, what happened with you guys?
Yeah, so that Tuesday when we decided not to meet, it was immediately just get into improvise, and we decided to record my sermon. So we did a video recording. First time ever I had to do that. And I used to just do audio. So that was interesting. And it wasn't too big of a deal. It was just get a phone and a good audio going on and record it and put it up. I didn't want to have to do any graphics, editing and graphics and so on. So we just decided to put our TV display up there for the verses and illustrations and whatnot. And when we posted it online, I had to prepare liturgy, same thing as you all, for them to do at home. That changed somewhat, but we tried to keep the same flow. A lot of prayers for COVID, and Calvin Institute of Worship was really helpful. They had those resources there, and I could just go use and see what others were doing, which was great for our denomination. That was really helpful. We had a prayer meeting on Facebook Messenger, and that first Sunday we had our highest attendance ever in our prayer meeting. Just interesting. And just praying for everybody and for the situation and for our members. And so we're sort of doing the same thing still. I do Wednesday night discipleship training, and we use WebEx. It's just our bias. We didn't want to use Zoom. We had a member that was with Cisco and used WebEx, so we used WebEx just simply because we were used to it. Some say it's more secure. I don't know. But yes, and that's been our MO since, for the past few Sundays now.
So now pull up my calendar again, do a little bit of counting. So now we've done this we'll get into the Lenten Easter aspect maybe a little bit after this, but now we've done it for a few weeks and various different things. What are you reflecting on? What have you learned? What are you thinking about with respect to this? What have you learned about the church and what it is and what it isn't and what it should be?
Well, Paul. Well, I think I was thinking right before I jumped on here that in some ways things aren't that different, and by that I mean what's really unique is we're all going through the same thing at the same time. It's a global pandemic. But what's not unique is that everybody has their own experience of it and their own response to it. So, and that's true in church too, right? Like I've got people that are clamoring for community. And so they're going to be on every Zoom call that we have. I've got people that are working 12 hours a day on Zoom. And so they're sending me text messages like, thank you so much for what you're doing, but God help me, I cannot be on another Zoom call. And I love you. I appreciate what you're doing, but no, it's not going to happen. My evenings, I'm gone. Maybe not even Sunday morning if, we do something like that. So, and then, there's everybody in between who's, going to do things once in a while, and not do everything. So in some ways I've been like, yeah, people are people and we've got different responses to each, to the same, what's unique is we're all responding to the same thing. We're just responding to it differently.
Any of the rest of you, what have you learned, at least from doing this on Zoom or not being together?
Social media is definitely helpful. And I've had to, there's I think for all of us, crash course in technology. I have a little bit of a experience with technology and so on, so it wasn't a difficult transition. But I sense that some of our members aren't very fond of it, of having to go and, simple things, and particularly for the older folks in our congregation, of having to install an app and join there. It was hard. It's there's challenges to it, basically, right? And a few of our small groups are meeting online still, and again using WebEx or Zoom, and it just felt it's awkward. I think it takes. I'm still not used to it, and we were in it like 4 or 5 weeks now. It doesn't. I long for going back to the way things were. I miss it. Way it works for a while, but I don't know if it's sustainable. That's the way I feel.
So and what, when you not sustainable, what does that, what activities, what would that look like, not sustainable?
I think the challenge in connecting and being able to see and each other when you're having that conversation, the absence is felt. Right? Yeah, that's it. It's hard to be hospitable. That's best way to go say it. And,
that's a good way to say it, actually.
Yeah,
it's a good way to say it. Now, Eric, you've had some pretty strong, you made a comment, I don't know if it was on Twitter or the effect of, yeah, it was on Twitter too. I love the window into the Dirksen mind via Twitter is truly a precious thing. But to the effect of, the churches that don't practice weekly communion were the ones who jumped at, virtual online communion the quickest, something to that effect.
You made that way more scandalous than it was. It was a simple, and I felt like I stepped in it. It was a simple observation, anecdotal, but it seemed to me a simple observation that I had a lot of colleagues who very early were clamoring for how do we do communion online. And most of them in the circles that I'm in seem to be churches that didn't take weekly communion.
But I thought it was a really important observation because I think there's something there.
I think there's plenty there. I just want to note that I wasn't making anything other than an observation on Twitter, but everybody just assumes, you say a thing and they're like, oh, well, he means this. Maybe I did, but I didn't say it that way. Now, I know that there are plenty of churches that take weekly communion. I don't know about plenty, but there are some, Mark's is an example, who have done it online and continued to. But my experience has been he's the exception. City Life is the exception, and others haven't. And so it came primarily from friends in Anglican churches, but it was also the RCA, PCA, others like that. Yeah.
Do you have communion in the liturgy that you send out?
Me?
Yes.
No, we have not been taking communion virtually. A few weeks ago, I started including a prayer for spiritual communion, which Jonathan Warren is an Anglican priest in Pittsburgh, I think he is now. And he wrote to me a pretty compelling piece on spiritual communion and how the church has often historically been in times where it couldn't partake together. And some of it was just like a personal bias, like I had no desire to do communion online, but primarily it was theological. Like I thought it's okay to long for it for a bit. Now you could ask me again in a few months if this is still going on. Are we still doing it? I kind of hope so, but
you kind of hope so. What?
I kind of hope that we're still not. I hope that because I have theological reasons for it.
You hope that if we're not meeting together, because I want to be clear just for the sake of your reputation.
Yeah, thank you.
If we're not meeting together, you're not doing communion separately in your liturgy. That's what you meant.
That is what I'm hoping. Yeah, I don't want to, because there's a principle behind it now. And so just because things get more difficult down the road, I don't want to abandon the principle. That's the simple point that I was trying to make there, poorly, but trying to make it.
Now, Mark, you are doing weekly communion. Have you done any theological reflection on that?
Not a lot. Just initially, just to say, I think Kyle Brooks, the church planter in Oakland, just said something that seemed compelling, and to give it a shot, online, and and the idea that I felt like my role as a minister of the word, and which includes the kind of the blessing of the church to oversee communion. The kind of the idea that I can still effectively oversee it through this call. That was kind of the thing that the hurdle I had to get over. So, but it's not like we're getting this. In fact, I created a feedback kind of form that is going out like today to our church, just of ministry in general over this time, and how for our whole church, of like, how has ministry affected you, good, bad, what would you change, or what's been great. And so I look for it because I don't feel like I'm getting this huge amount of feedback about how we're ministering, but I am getting just people are coming like very faithfully to those calls, and they're participating in the communion, and they're staying afterwards for prayer. And so attendance seems to be saying it's connecting, so that's, in terms of communion, that's it has been non-problematic and it hasn't been like a conflict area or a problem area in any way. So yeah.
Noel, what have you done with communion?
We did communion together online for Easter. That was the first one, and we have this liturgy for communion, and I focused the camera there. They saw me physically breaking bread and pouring the wine, and of course, all of us had to prepare our own bread and wine at home. But that was the first time we did it, and we never did communion in the whole, those previous weeks. I don't anticipate us doing it again together, and I think for theological reasons, I also would rather do it when we're together. We'll probably do what Mark is doing now that I've heard you doing it. It's do it online together. Just copy you guys, shamelessly. Ironically, that first Sunday we had to meet online. My text was in Matthew, where Jesus, on Passover, and was breaking the bread and pouring the wine and teaching his disciples, this is his body and this is his blood. And I couldn't do communion, but I didn't want to change the sermon, so that was a very good explanation for why that Sunday, why we couldn't do it and why, what it was. So it was a teaching moment, and providential too, that I happened to be scheduled to preach on that text.
It's interesting to me too, also in this moment, I was fascinated, when I was thinking about the communion aspect, I was fascinated by the fact that Bishop Barron, who is obviously a very high profile Roman Catholic bishop, they were doing, daily communion on YouTube or on the internet with people. And the Roman Catholic Church is an interesting case because Roman Catholics had large television ministries going on fairly early, radio ministry. And so for a very ancient church, their embrace of technology is noteworthy. I don't know if the Orthodox are doing anything similar to it. And so then these questions of physical presence, non-physical presence, communion, what does our physical presence mean together in one space? How does it impact us psychologically, emotionally, theologically? What's the significance of it? Suddenly all of these issues, which are things that I hadn't given a tremendous amount of thought to, suddenly are all at the fore and are not just sort of little corners where we're thinking, what is it when I visit a shut-in and bring communion to the shut-in or the nursing home or something like this. Now suddenly we have this on a large scale. Obviously time, we don't know sort of how this is going to unfold in terms of meeting together. What have you learned in terms of, as you've been trying to care for the congregation? So I've been doing, just for those who don't know, I've been doing weekly videos, not unlike other videos that I had been making for a while, because that's what I knew how to do. We don't have any professional musician. Well, it didn't seem anyway, that's the way we've done it so far. And we didn't go to Zoom partly because I knew that I was terrified at what it would mean if I could actually deploy it with a lot of our older members. And so we've been doing Facebook and YouTube for some sermon videos, and people can, watch along with that. And there's some interchange in Facebook comments during the rollout and the first playing of the video. But one of the things that we did early on was the council is trying to keep in touch with the members of the church each week, to have some kind of touch point. It might be a phone call, it might be a text, but making sure that everyone's okay. What are you learning about the well-being of your flock during this period, and now that we're weeks into this and don't really quite know when lockdowns will end? What are you learning on that score? How are people doing?
I'd like to jump in, because when we decided we weren't meeting, and my brain was sensing and my heart was sensing this is a moment. This is and something kind of a switch went on inside of me in terms of leadership, and just like this sense of I want to step up to this moment. I want to be, this is big. This is a flock. I'm shepherd of the flock, and I have to wrap my mind around where we're going and how I guide them there, or whatever. And I still feel like my attitude has been, I'm very curious. I don't know where this is all going. I don't know what God's going to do through this, but to keep voicing that to everyone else too. We don't know, but God is up to something, and just guiding with that open curiosity of not knowing exactly how God's going to use all this. But one of the things that I felt very clear about is just to call as many people every week as I could. So I just made a list, or I took the list and I just started making a spreadsheet of calling people and just trying to get through the whole list. It's still a few weeks into trying that, and I don't even know, I might be a little over halfway, but because it takes time, but it's actually, I've been really struck with how meaningful that is. And praying with people over the phone, ending every call, almost every call, like with praying with them about the things that they have going on in their lives. And so it's been a real practical way that like I've been able to stand behind what I've been telling the church at this time is, let's see if in this time of mandatory social distancing, if we can't come out the other side of it closer instead of more distant from each other. And so my way to do that is to just call everyone up and just say, how are you doing? What prayer requests do you have? How's this affecting you? And just listen, and then pray for them. So that's been huge. That's been really enjoyable. It's been, I don't know, it's been really meaningful and enjoyable for me to be able to do that.
What have you heard from people? I mean, nothing specific, obviously.
Right.
Let's hear the dirt out of
right?
City Life Church.
I think, just the variety, it's so different. Everything's so different. It's striking to hear the real struggles that are you wouldn't think of. So like the husband who's like an ICU nurse, and the wife his wife is a teacher, and then they have these two little ones at home, like that are preschool age, like toddler basically, and teachers having to supposedly still teach from home. So the struggles of all of that, the fears and all the things wrapped up in just that couple, just that household, of the ICU stuff, but also the education stuff, and just like I'm trying to keep my kids, on several days. I got it in our house. Lisa's off 3 days a week doing at a clinic, so she's in the health profession, and I'm 3 days a week now. I'm the boarding school director, with the class lessons and oh, it's time for me to make a meal for everyone again. It's like just it's snack time. Just like whoa, this is crazy. And so to think of doing that, but also have a full-time job that I have I have to be keeping these students that are all over the place going on their work while I'm dealing with my new home situation. So some of that stuff just blows my mind. And then there's some people who, job insecurities or losses that strike me. We've had a couple people who being connected virtually has been like a breath of fresh air, because they had certain things going on in their life. They couldn't come on Sundays for like a half a year or whatever, and all of a sudden they feel way more in touch and ministered to and integrated. It's been a huge blessing for some people, that way. So those are some of the things that I'm picking up on. But
interesting.
Yeah.
Any other observations from what's happening in people's homes?
Well, for me personally, because I'm bivocational, and the company I work for is profiting pretty well because a lot more people are buying computers because they're working from home. It's in the news. So, but there's a blur between. I struggle with separating personal time and work.
Oh yeah.
Because I'm working from home, every morning, and of course there's River Rock. So from a bivocational perspective, I do have to go and make sure that the time I have is, get work enough done in that job as well as River Rock. I've been grateful with how these existing small groups have, we have a women's group, we have a Friday Bible study group, we have this discipleship training Wednesdays, and a few other people are meeting through Zoom, praying together and so on, and just the community figuring out ways to go online with themselves. It's good to meet them, in these meetings. I try to be in those small group meetings so that because we talk about our lives and how we're affected and who's affected, and who do we need to be praying for. Sunday prayer meetings are always good. That seems to be our de facto Sunday meeting time, is to just meet for prayer. So while I don't have as much time to go talk to them one by one, at least these small groups are helping me at least keep in touch with them and somehow still be able to understand, know what's going on in their lives, and how I can be praying for them. But yes, this thing's just the home and the home front and churches. To me, the juggling those two is it's been an interesting experience so far.
Everything happy in Davis there, Dirksen?
Well, I was going to repeat what I said before, that I've been struck by how people are responding differently to it. You know, some similar to Mark, I call some people and they're like, no, we're good. Thanks for checking in. Maybe talk to you in a week or two. And I call other people and they're barely hanging on by a thread. You know, they got small kids and they're like, I didn't sign up for this. You know, you could just see it. We delivered, so on Palm Sunday, we delivered palm fronds to everybody and maintained social distancing. And it took like 10 hours. But it's crazy. Or 2 days, I should say. Friday.
Ooh, yeah.
It was a delight just to see people, first of all, but even the reactions there were so varied. It was like a window into kind of where people are. Some people were like, I had somebody say to me not that long ago, you know, I feel guilty that I'm doing really well, you know, and I know the world seems to be coming apart in various places. And I've got friends whose nerves are frayed, but I'm going to be honest with you. I just had a really busy, like 2 months at work, and home life was kind of chaotic. And I felt like I never saw my kids. And all of a sudden I get to be with them, and it's kind of quiet, and I'm doing pretty good. And I feel guilty about that. I delivered palm fronds to the home of a young family, and the moment we could hear them through the door, they're like, it's the Dirksens. And the moment they opened the door, just poof, tears. Yeah. Just that kind of contact was so missing. And they've got, you know, small kids, and I can barely imagine. I've just got teenagers these days, and that's a different ballgame. But I've just been struck by how, you know, people are doing it differently, and handling it differently. Not some better than others, just differently, you know. Yeah. The introverts seem to be doing the best.
The revenge of the introverts. Yeah. The extroverts get and now the introverts are like, how do you like me now? Yeah. I'm at home and happy.
Yep.
Yeah.
I do notice a lot more social media activity in some of our members. You know, see how they're doing. It's a window into their lives and how they're coping with kids at home. A few of our members have college kids that are at home, and spending more time together, doing things together. And yes, you're right, Eric. People respond differently, and seems to be a lot more family time now than usual for many, and appreciate that a lot. If there's one positive thing that's for that, we have a few members that lost their jobs and coping. So it's various different things and experiences.
That brings me to my next topic, which is finances and church. Now, in our congregation, most churches survive financially off the donations and gifts and offerings and tithes of their membership, which, at least in our congregation, still works with passing of plates and physical paper checks going in. We have hardly anyone in our church that gives online. And so many of our members have been mailing in, sending in. I've yet to get a report from the deacons in terms of what, it'll be interesting to see what March and then especially April looks like. I've been thinking about the fact that, this building is paid for. We have my salary, we have utilities, a few other little things. Deacons have a benevolence fund that we haven't really had to tap in and help anyone directly with. The majority of my membership either works for the state or is retired. And so their income, the stock market going up and down, but for the most part, a lot of their incomes are sort of set. But I've been thinking a lot about you guys because your churches are younger. You have probably more people who have lost their jobs, had financial insecurity. What's been happening financially with your church, and how long can you ride this out? And do you think about that?
Let me start. We did get our January to March financial report, and we're probably down about 3,000 from where we were a quarter ago. But that's smart. That's so it. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was, and I think we have enough in the reserves to last us through maybe in the next few months, where we will be in a reasonably healthy position. Giving has definitely been down. April's going to be interesting. We'll see how that works. It's good that I'm a part-time pastor, so that helps somewhat with the expenses. It's really just me and the rent that we're the lease that we have to pay. So financially, we're okay. Online donations, that's what we're relying on. We have that set up in our website. That's where most people give.
How about you guys? You guys are both full-time, salaried by your churches. You're not new churches. Neither of you, well, I don't, neither of you have, I think a lot about churches that have big mortgage payments. And because, all of us here know some churches that have, 5 figures a month that they're paying on a facility, and they've got staff salaries, especially in evangelical churches. If you have a church that grew fairly large, you got a fairly healthy income stream, let's say in an affluent suburb, but also fairly high costs, usually almost no savings. But first, before we get into speculating about the future, where are you two at? River Rock or not River Rock, but City Life and Christchurch Davis. How are you guys doing?
Well, I can just go quickly. I'm really curious to hear about Eric, having bought a building, right? Like in the last few years. So, but we still rent. Our rent's pretty cheap, and I'm a pretty big expense as the only full-time, staff person. But we've been stable, and there hasn't been a noticeable change one way or the other. And we'll see how that all goes, and I plan on everyone in our congregation giving half of their stimulus check to just kidding. Totally kidding.
Putting that out there.
Totally kidding. Joking. I know they're not they're not watching this video. I'm totally kidding. Yeah, no, that has come up though. We're actually encouraging people who, we know there's going to be people who really need it, and there's going to be people you guys have already talked about, people who say, well, I actually feel really blessed right now. And so we've been, some of us feeling like we're in that position. And so then it's like, just encouraging people, here's some things you could give to when that check comes. But yeah, we're not really scared financially of anything right now. And I think that's part of the curiosity and the trust in God during this time. Like, what is God doing? How is God sustaining?
So far as I know, we're doing okay. I think I haven't gotten any notification from our deacons or finance team that, any alarm bells are ringing. I think we're doing, there's literally someone sitting over there that just said we're doing okay.
In my experience, clergy are reticent to talk about this. Lay people are a lot more practical and pragmatic about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a church planter. I guess technically I still am. So for years I was signing my own checks, and then we have, I grew up, and I've got a leadership team and deacons who follow and track these kinds of things. And so it's no longer my job, praise the Lord, to check on what the bank account looks like. And I'm perfectly happy to keep it that way. Even though we're fairly young, but I think I would be curious. I don't know the number, but I think a pretty small percentage of our giving is actually on Sunday. Not none, but I think a pretty small percentage. So in that sense, so far as I know, the not being there on Sunday may have had some impact. Similarly, a lot of our people have been able to work from home, and so there's some furloughs, but for the most part, even just sort of thinking out loud, a majority of our people are still pulling a paycheck. And as far as buying a building, we bought a building 2 years ago but decided when we first were going to do it very quickly in that story that we weren't going to do it unless we could pay cash, and it was a smoking good deal. So we don't have a mortgage, thankfully. And that turned out to be, hindsight is 20/20, and the Lord is kind and merciful, but that was a really good decision to not take out a big loan and be worried about things these days.
Yeah.
So what's going on in other churches around you guys that you're noticing? I mean, we all have, we have our internal Christian Reform network, but then we also have other networks in other churches. What kind of things are you hearing out there in the broader church?
There's the different levels, right? There's the things you see in the news, like the group in Southern California who's suing the governor, pastors, for telling them not to meet. But it's interesting because I think Eric might have alluded to this, or you talked about a tweet that he tweeted about just what people jumping into the virtual thing. So it's been interesting to see how this brings out the personality of churches, because what City Life is doing right now over Zoom is very much us, because we're not really worried about, this looks real shiny and we got a green backdrop and we're doing everything perfect and we're dialing in a mixer with sound. But thank you. It's coffee delivery.
Wow.
Yeah. It's decaf for the afternoon. There's Lisa.
There's Lisa.
Hi,
Hey, Lisa.
Hi. So great to see you.
She's photobombing. She's photobombing my channel.
Hi, friend.
Paul says you're photobombing his channel. End the meeting. End it.
Next, she sends in the kids.
Exactly. Oh, that's good. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, I would just pass it on. I just find it interesting. It brings out the personality of churches, because I'm on some lists of churches, and so I see like, join us for worship, or the video has released of our worship, and it's like, that's very much them, and that would not be us, and even sometimes you'll pick up on some folks in your church who say, these other churches are doing that, and you know them well enough to know they've got a little part of them that would love a glitzier thing or a whatever thing, and it's just kind of it's kind of cute. But I watch them. I just am like, man, I'm so glad I'm a good fit for my church and for what we are, because I'll look at something else and I'll think that just doesn't feel edifying to me, and I don't think our people would like that. And I'm speaking specifically of the ones where it's more of almost like a music video song, and then it's like a TED Talk video of a person with no audience, and it's kind of okay. But some people love it, and I've heard neighbors talk. I just moved, and so I moved in this new neighborhood, and some people are introducing themselves and saying how they go to a church, but how so-and-so put me on to this Brooklyn Tabernacle website, and I've been every Sunday turning on one of their old services, and it's wonderful. And, for one person, that is church, that nails it, and that wouldn't be they wouldn't have that same reaction if they came in on one of our Zoom calls. So...
Well, so we did this little video thing, and I was talking to one member of the church, and she's like, I was just, this is an older person, so I just go to TV church now. And it's like, whatever I'm doing, I mean, she's not going to be able to find it on the internet or anything like that. And so it's, it's Charles Stanley for the duration. And I was talking to my mother, and my mother does her church, Pleasant Street, and then Park Street, which was my sister and my brother-in-law's church. His first Sunday pastoring was the first Sunday of the pandemic. So the only church he's known is the empty Park Street Congregational. And then mine. So on Sunday, me and my mother's just kind of clicking between all of these churches and comparing the sermons. And so, Mark, your point there is, and that going to get us to the next point, which is going to be the future. But people are watching, and I look at what some services are doing, some videos out there, and it's like, wow, these people have staff, they have production quality, they have camera work, and it's like, yeah, if this is a competition between shows, the Paul's Corner of the Office show. But anyway,
don't sell yourself short.
I tell you, the words of Tim Blackman and Chuck Dillender still, remember it well. The what you win them with is what you win them to.
Yeah.
I think that's showing up quite a bit, and you resist the temptation to make it into a production.
Yeah.
So yeah, I try to be a little bit more. I said if we were going to do online, it's just going to be for River Rock and not use it as a marketing tool. Yeah. I think is what we try to keep it as much as possible. So yes, I remember that this time.
I actually I talked about this in my Easter sermon this Sunday, but I actually really am concerned about I don't know quite what to do with it, but thinking about Cornelius hearing the Easter message from Peter and inviting everyone he knows and packing the house, and I had some fun with that about social distancing, and Jews supposed to social distance from Gentiles, but I honestly, it made me want to talk about and try to figure out how to guide our church towards considering. We've always had from the very beginning the idea, very crucial to who we are, who is yet not in the room, and who thinks church is just for people with their beliefs screwed down tight, and so we're never going to step in there. And to be a church that people get the sense of, this is a place where I don't have to have my beliefs screwed down tight, and I can just be there for as long as needed. So that part of our identity, the Cornelius inviting, thinking of all the people who don't know the Easter message yet. It just makes me, I don't know, a combination of like just curious, nervous, I don't have the answers on how the church continues to embody that in this time. So,
Any other observations any of you have about the church beyond us and our congregations in terms of what you see or hear going on with this?
I've been fascinated to see maybe three, not that it's this tidy, but I've observed, I think, sort of three main kinds of churches. There are those, maybe I'm backtracking already, but it seems like philosophy of ministry is now to the fore once again. Yeah. And so you either have one and you're embracing it. I guess let me put it this way. You either have a stated philosophy of ministry and you're embracing it, or you don't realize you have a philosophy of ministry and you're just doing whatever. I don't know. I lost my train of thought there, but I'm sort of fascinated by my colleagues who say we just seamlessly put things online, and it's been, no big deal. There's something there.
It's a great sound effect, by the way, Eric.
Thank you. That's my tech savvy thing. There have been other congregations or colleagues that are like, I don't know. It just seems like everybody else is doing this, so we're going to do it too, without seemingly pausing to reflect whether that does fit them in the way that Mark talked about, their Zoom call fitting city life. And so that's sort of fascinated me to kind of watch whether people are being reflective in how we go forward, or whether you're just doing stuff because that's what other people are supposed to be doing, or because that's what you think you're supposed to be doing. I've observed, I've thought the last couple of weeks for sure that similar to Mark, just the last 2 weeks on Palm Sunday and then on Easter, we've been doing a Zoom call for our services. And the response to that has been overwhelmingly positive. What I was doing was an at-home liturgy that people would work through themselves. And then I would do like a 5-minute video of a meditation, not a sermon, but just 5-minute video, usually sitting right here on the text for the week. And then people could watch that on their own. The last 2 weeks, though, we've done a Zoom call, and that has felt very Christchurch as well. And people have been responded really positively to that. And I'm meandering way of thinking. I've also got colleagues who I've heard they're like, I'm fatigued by live stream. I am fatigued by preaching to an empty room. And that's fascinating to me as well. I mean, I'm sick of Zoom, but that feels different.
Are you, when you are, it sounds like, Noel, you're doing Sunday morning from your rented facility, from your worship space. Mark, are you doing yours from home, or do you go down to right there in your new home?
Yeah, this is it. This is where you'll find me Sunday mornings. And it's a closet, so you'll find me here every morning picking out my shoes that I'm going to wear for the day. It's a walk-in closet, yeah. Yeah.
And how about you, Eric? Do you do it from your church building?
No.
You do it from home?
Yeah, I thought about going to, I thought about being at our facility for Easter, and then I was actually planning on it, and then that just didn't feel right. Like, I didn't feel like solidarity with my people who couldn't be there but wanted to. So we stayed home, and we put the whole family on one of these Zoom calls, and we're a box that takes up 5 people, and we work through the liturgy together that way.
So let's imagine, I would imagine that there's going to be a slow opening of things. I mean, the governor had a talk yesterday where he talked about some of it's a dimmer switch, not an on-off switch. And I would imagine churches are going to be at the tail end of things that open. And so it is conceivable. I kind of doubt we'll see anything in May. It's conceivable we might not see anything towards September. Maybe they'll open with smaller groups and social distancing, and older people stay home. Well, what are some initial ideas? And again, I'm not going to hold anybody to any of this prognostication by any means, because if there's one thing I think we should learn from this is that we don't know what's coming down the road, because especially in those early days, things looked very different one day to the next. But how's this going to change you? How's this going to change your church? How's this going to change the church?
I'm trying to think of some kind of joke about a plan to pre-record services for 20 services in a row so that I can just have all summer off. But I guess that's the joke. I just told you the joke I was trying to come up with, and that was funny enough. But yeah,
it's a clever image.
I think it's I think it's gonna be way longer than we think, and I think there was a New York Times piece someone told me about, but I didn't read about. Think in terms of 14 months of if we're flattening the curve and a huge chunk of the people haven't been exposed to this virus, then it's not just woohoo, we're back open, because then you just keep going through these waves of right. But and then I just saw a notification while we're on this call that I think somebody like the mayor of LA or something like that said they don't expect that they would expect that we're not going to see big gatherings like concerts and things like that in California until 2021. I think people are just starting to say, okay, let's look beyond flattening the curve, and what does that mean? And I'm intrigued by that. I'm really intrigued. I don't have a lot of answers. Yeah. At first, it felt so far off to think, like, oh, we have a summer camping trip planned for the church. We'll probably 50-50 on whether that'll happen or not, and that now it's starting to feel to me like that, people will be saying, like, we don't want to be part of this, maybe we can go here or there, but we don't want to be responsible for a second wave, a new cluster of an outbreak because we got 100 people together at a campsite,
Especially in a church in Sacramento after the church in Rancho Cordova.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be you on the Sacramento Bee, Mark.
Being persecuted.
I'm fascinated by what comes, what the next month, 2 months look like as well. And it feels to me like postulating is just a fool's errand. I don't know how I'm going to feel. I certainly don't know how anybody here is going to feel. I would imagine it's going to be as varied then as it is now. If you can, if the guidelines are no gatherings over 50, that's easy enough for a church my size. If our weekly worship is around 100 on a good day, then 2 services and we should be fine.
Yeah.
I have no idea what my colleagues will do who have a church of 500 or 1,000. I've, no clue. That looks much different from them. I think maybe I said this already. There are certainly some benefits to being a small church pastor during a time like this. But it just feels like, who can guess what people's psyche is going to be? And it's certainly not going to be monolithic. You might have people the first Sunday that you can open your doors. Maybe you're expecting it to be packed because you think people are going to be clamoring in, but maybe you get 20 people wearing masks and latex gloves looking at each other really like, I don't know. And you might have plenty of other people that are just running around waiting to give each other hugs. And your elders are at the door, punching people in the face for trying to give somebody a hug. I don't know. Who can tell?
Yeah.
Nobody can. I mean, we were talking about ventilators ad nauseum 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
We're not talking about ventilators anymore, are we? I don't even know.
Not much.
I'm talking about the economy now.
Yeah.
One thing though, I did notice that it's doing, at least to me and to a few of our members, is it was amazing. Easter Sunday, I went out because I had to go get some, looking around for some electronic stuff. There's a shortage of webcams, amazingly enough. But the big box stores were closed. And around Folsom, these geese and ducks and turkeys were just walking around the roads, and few cars. And I'm going like, this is Sabbath,
Yeah.
And I can get used to this on a Sunday like this. This is how it looks like, feels like.
The strip mall has gone fallow.
It has. Yeah.
Oh, that's good, Mark.
And we're in the suburb. Kids' sports are gone. It's it's new normal.
Yeah.
I hope it stays.
Well, any questions or things you all? I've sort of been directing and guiding this, but anything, points you guys wanted to make, or questions you have, or anything like that we haven't talked about?
Similar to your question, Paul, I've been sort of intrigued listening to, not even listening, but just kind of hearing casually here and there from some people who are wondering, what does religion, not just Christianity, but what does religion look like when this is all done? And I'm sort of seeing 2 camps on this too. Like, is this the final straw of secularism, that it just, breaks the camel's back and if the economy is all about mergers and acquisitions and who can survive, is the same thing true in the religious world, where, you just, like, the small church disappears because they run out of funds, or, all you've got left is the glitz and glam of the thing online in the Christian world, or at least in the evangelical world. Or is this the end, or is this secularism, that kind of comes in and this is the end? People are like, well, I made it through without faith and I'm fine, so nobody returns to church. Or is the opposite happen? Is this the beginning of a revival, religious revival in places around the world? There were people making 2 opposite points in my Twitter feed, and one of them, I might butcher his name, so forgive me. It's Sadi Hamid, is a Muslim who writes he writes about a lot of things, and I find most of them really interesting and compelling. And he was saying, his opinion was, this could very well be the beginning of a religious revival throughout much of the world. Like, this could bring people back into, or for the first time, in touch with a religious experience or the desire for religion. And he was saying that as a practicing Muslim, and I was sort of fascinated by that. So there again, I think it's a fool's errand to postulate too much, but there's a whole host of things that we don't know that I'm curious about what happens. The economy is fascinating, churches are fascinating, people's psyche is fascinating. The number of people who have time to think that haven't had time to think. I wonder about things like clergy. Like, how many pastors have a whole lot of time now, and they've just been like nose to the grindstone, getting it done for 20 years. Maybe they've never had a sabbatical, and now all of a sudden they've got a lot of time to think and reflect. How many people are going to leave the ministry when this is done? They're like, you know what? I don't want to go back to it. Or how many people are going to redo their philosophy of ministry for their church and be like, I'm all in on the show, or I'm not doing the show anymore. There are so many unknowns and so many things that are fascinating about this huge thing that's happening right now that I don't know. I just have a hard time believing we'll just all go back.
Wow. Yeah.
And I can just imagine where consumerism, I can see where ads and the way we frame is for people to go back to normal. We to go do this, buy this, do that, right? It'll sound hollow to many people. I think that was the article that I read this morning that was posted by a member on Facebook. It just seems as if don't believe that, right? Because we're not going to go back to what it was before. I think that this is affecting people deeply in many ways. The absence of what they used to do normally, I think, is helping them realize what are the essentials. And I think a lot of people love church. I don't know. That to me, Eric, is where at least for me and a few others that I've talked to, they do miss the church. And I think
just personally for me, this has been really hard not being together on Sunday. I probably didn't realize how dependent I am emotionally on that. And so my Sunday routine now is I'll walk here to church, deal with the homeless people that are all outside my office, and that's normal. And the irony is that I have more communion with the homeless than anyone else outside my family right now in terms of face to face, which of course makes my wife nervous, but no other way to deal with it. But so I'll come in here and I'll make my video in the morning, and I gotta upload it. I've got faster internet at home, so I'll go back at home and upload it from there. And I just so miss being together with the people that I've shared the last 22 years of my life with, in terms of my faith. And it's really hard. And actually some people in my church have talked about, well, maybe we should do a Zoom type thing. I think I would find that even more difficult because it would make the distance feel that, everybody monkeying with their phone and, well, how does this work? And, suddenly unmute everyone and everyone talks at once. And whereas at least talking to people individually on the phone, it's, at least there's some connection. So yeah, I agree that I don't know that any of us know what's coming out the other side of this. And we'll see.
And I think that's you bring up a good point, Paul, that the colleague or two that I've heard say we seamlessly put things online, I actually worry about that for reasons of like this should cause pain, right? This is something to lament. And our Zoom calls are imperfect, and that's okay with me. Like it should be a little bit messy. It should be awkward, and you should leave, I think, something like that with a bit of a pang. And that's one of the reasons why also we're not taking communion, which is not meant to be a judgment on anybody that is, but I also didn't want to rush right to let's just make it all be okay, right? Like I think it was sort of a gift that this started in Lent, that it gave us the opportunity to lament in unique ways and be like, yeah, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. Christian worship should be communal and embodied and participatory, and those things have been ripped from us. And so let's be sad about that and not just rush right into, the Christian world can just be another consumerist pill of let's just make the pain go away instead of what does faithfulness look like in the midst of suffering instead of trying to alleviate our suffering. So that said, I'm very glad that it's Eastertide because that was getting to be a long Lent.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still not, fun. Like our Easter time was both delightful and sad at the same time.
Yeah.
And that just strikes me as I think where we're supposed to be, at least as kind of a gut reaction. Like there's pain involved, and I think it gives us all like we should name that.
I have a great curiosity for all this about where God's taking it, and just feel like a satisfaction sitting in a curious place and being a little bit anticipatory about what the future holds. But when I guess about it, then I what stands out most is probably just the two things of a lot of people are going to get sick and die, and it's already clear that a lot of people are going to be economically affected by this. So if you just picture, like people are saying, this is a longer period. So if this is another year or two of waves of COVID-19 and the economy fallout, I just think that we are going to have plenty of work to do as pastors. And it's 2 years from now, I think we'll be a pretty banged up humanity who's had to just hold each other together in a lot of ways. Like, I think that's where my mind goes. But yeah. And then that makes me just want to grab whatever tool, it doesn't really matter how, just to get in the ditch with people through this time and minister and let the gospel shine, So.
Good. Maybe that's a good word to end on, unless any of you have anything else you'd like to put in. Well, I appreciate. I don't know if are we going to do our monthly cluster meeting next week on Zoom on Tuesday? Have we talked about that?
We haven't talked about it, but I would vote for a yes, except that Tuesdays are now one of my boarding school days, so I might not be the best. If we could switch it to Wednesday or Thursday, but yeah.
Well, maybe we should send out an email and
yeah,
because I've enjoyed talking to you guys about this, and this is online, and so it's not appropriate to necessarily be as personal as candid as we are normally in a cluster gathering. But
hi, Mom. I didn't know this was going online. Was I supposed to sign something?
See that little red light up in the corner?
Consent.
Oh, great. Now some lawyer's going to come. You violated Mark Holland's civil rights. I'm like, what, again? Anyway, thank you all for participating. And I wanted to do this both in terms of documenting, because we're not going to remember. I've been reading Nassim Taleb's Black Swan, and that first chapter where he talks about growing up in and out of Lebanon during the war years. He talks about the fact that people's reflections in the middle of it are very different from their reflections afterwards. And so I do want us to remember March and what we've been through, and I want to document some of that. But I think it's also, one of the things that I actually got distracted by the Roman Catholic idea. But, so how does leadership emerge in things like this? And Mark, you talked about that. So in some ways, Andrew Cuomo has, his daily presentations. I mean, in many ways, he's been somewhat of a national leader, as the center of the crisis has been in New York. But how does leadership emerge? Denominations. I think, Noel, you talked about the Calvin Center Calvin Institute of Worship, which is not specifically a denominational leadership, but some of the denominational stuff have been helping and putting out things, the network, so again, I find events like this ought not to be wasted by not taking a step back and paying attention, because here we have an opportunity to watch individuals, families, communities, and the church disrupted. And I think Eric, your observation about churches and their philosophies of ministry, having an intentional one or not having one sort of exposed and brought out to the world, I think that's very true. And on many levels, a time of disruption like this helps. It's apocalypse, it's revelation, and a lot is revealed, and good and bad. And so I think we ought not just have it fly by, and 10 years from now, oh yeah, remember 2020 and the COVID pandemic and blah, 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 blah. So what we're going through now is important, and it won't be remembered unless it's articulated somehow and noted. Whether anybody ever cares to go back and look at it, who knows? But I think it's important, and I like it on my channel because there's so many different people looking, some people not at all involved in church, some people skeptics about the whole thing, or even church haters. I like opening up the window and saying, these are real pastors and real churches, and this is how they're dealing with it, and this is how they talk about it, and this is how they think about it. And I think that has value. And I know, just listening to the three of you, I've really appreciated and been helped just hearing how you're going through it, and that helps me. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for hosting it. This has been really, really enjoyable.
It was.
Wait for the comments tomorrow. It goes up tomorrow morning, so feel free to. Mark flips over. Yeah, he's learned something on Zoom.
Sorry, my next meeting's about to start.
All right.
Let me just plug this: www.riverrockchurch.org.
There you go. All right.
I'll put all the links in the show notes.
.tv.
Thank you, my brothers. This has been wonderful.
Thanks, Paul.
Paul, thank you. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Take care.
See you, gentlemen.
Bye-bye.